were sitting at one table, and Pastor was over at another table, and he was talking about being at the Wilds this week, and somebody asked him, who's going to be preaching this week. And he said, I don't know yet. I haven't had a chance to ask Wayne. And that's how I found out that I was doing this tonight. Not that I object. This study on forensic faith is absolutely riveting in many ways. Because the way Wallace goes about the discussion of what constitutes what I would call real faith, faith that actually is functioning, faith that is something more than a theory or an idea or a figment of our imagination, is pretty significant in terms of the way he goes about this. Okay. So I'm going to do a little bit of review because I'm not exactly sure where Pastor ended up last week here. I know where he ended up last week in the morning service, which is already that. But I just want to deal with one statement here. The Christian life demands a commitment. Christianity is not some static statement about some aspect of life. And the word commitment itself is a word that when we contemplate the idea of making a commitment, it's a consistency word, okay? Commitment has consistency embedded in it. It's a character word. When you say, I'm committed to do something, you're speaking about your character. And it does not allow for hypocrisy, charade, or duplicity whatsoever. It's an integrity word. Now, however, all right, there are people who are committed to the complete inverse of who we are and what we believe, in our whole structure of life, our whole worldview. They are equally committed to the actions and acts that are associated with that. And if you don't believe that, take 10 minutes and look at the events that have taken place since the election. There are people who are committed to ensuring that President Trump does not remain the president. They are committed to that. And understand that when you talk, they are consistent with what they believe, and they are going to do things that are inherently connected to that. But as we think about this, and we then therefore says the Christian life demands a commitment, it's an entirely different commitment because the entire basis for our decision process is entirely different from what the rest of the world lives and how they serve. And so as we go into this, it helps us to understand what Pastor's been dealing with the last couple of weeks on this whole issue of faith that is a faith based on concrete evidence. And he talked about this as well when he talked about the duty to show the evidence of our faith. And if actions are not demonstrating that our faith is consistent with our statements about our faith or what constitutes faith, then there's a problem. And it's at that point that you start to ask questions, ask legitimate questions about this person's faith. Faith in what? Faith about what? Et cetera, et cetera. And so the idea here, when we talk about the word evidence, all right, it's a word that is related to the idea of something which is verifiable. It's factual. You've probably heard the phrase or the statement, you're all welcome to your own opinion, but you are not welcome to your own facts. And that crosses the spectrum of just about every subject set that you can deal with. You're welcome to your opinion, fine and dandy, but your opinion is not verifiable under most circumstances. If you listen to somebody's discussion of their own opinion, you go, well, where are the facts that back up that opinion? Well, it's what I feel is right. immediately that should force us to, slam on the brakes and say, wait a minute, you don't have anything to say here, because what you're dealing with is something that can't be proven, can't be verified, can't be anything. It's just, it makes you feel good. Well, whoopee-doo. I'm not really concerned about whether you feel good, because your feelings are going to be that which leads people down an unfortunate path, and that we see this all the time. And so it's not the same as an alibi either. And an alibi usually cannot be verified. And when you peel the onion back of an alibi, almost always, you're going to find that there's nothing behind it. It's about one layer of onion skin thick. And this is the other piece that Wallace gets into substantially. If you get a chance to read this book, I would take the opportunity to do it. It is worth reading. I had not read it. I hadn't cracked the cover on it until Pastor said here last week, Wednesday. And it is worth reading. It is an easy read, but it will test your thoughts. It will test your living. It will test your commitment, etc. So he talked about this, the idea of serving others, sing praise with all your mind, pray expectantly, go obediently. We're going to run through some of these things fairly quickly because but I'm going to focus on this with all your minds right there in the middle. So serve, it's a hard attitude. When we talk about our faith, there is an attitude. Attitude is good. If you have a hard attitude to serve without selfish motive, and you're putting others first, guess what you've just done? You have completely turned the world upside down. The world does not function without selfish motive. The world does not put others first. Inherent to Christianity is both of those. It's inherent in the life of Christ. You go through the Gospels and you see Christ serving without selfish motive. And as I can remember back 40-some years ago when I came to know the Lord, and the way I came to know the Lord was Brenda and I were dating, and she said that if we're going to keep dating, we have to have a Bible study. Well, I said, okay, fine. We were having fun, all the rest of that. But sooner or later, I just said, I got to cut to the chase here. I got to decide yes or no. We're going to fish or cut bait. We're either going to stay together or we're not going to stay together. But we're not going to be going down two different tracks, two different worldviews. So over the course of about 2.5 months, I read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation with the intent of answering one question. Does the Bible hold water on its own? Does the evidence within it, does the argument within it follow in a complete, order in sequence? That you can go, okay, I can believe this because I'm not jumping all over the place, I'm not finding holes or whatever. But the one place when I came to this and I read it, I said, you have got to be kidding me. And it was an episode in the life of Christ at the Lord's Supper when he washed the disciples' feet. I said to myself, if the God of this, or if the Son of God of this religion can wash feet, and he said, follow in my footsteps, I'm going, this thing completely shatters anything I've heard of before. And if we ask ourselves the question, can I wash, fill in the blank, somebody's feet, and serve in such a way, believe me, that's putting others first. And there's no selfish motive. Nobody washes feet for a selfish reason. I don't care how you cut that one. But so, as we think about it, it's a hard attitude, all right? Sing praise. So, when we read through this, a psalm of praise, make a joyful noise unto the Lord, all ye lands, serve the Lord with gladness, come before his presence with singing. Know ye that the Lord is God. It is he that has made us, not us, not we ourselves. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter into his gates with thanksgiving, into his courts with praise. Be thankful unto him. Bless his name, for the Lord is good. His mercy is everlasting, and his truth endureth to all generations. Now, here's my question. How many hours of every day, how many minutes of every day is that true? It's true all the time. Well, then may I make a suggestion to you? Inform your face that that's true. Inform your disposition that that's true. If we're not singing praise, if this is not our heart, if this is not what's our core, are we really Christians? Are we living some other worldview and we're putting on this mask? Some of you know me, but some of you don't. And some of you only know me for a few years, but I can be a fairly intensive individual, fairly driven, and et cetera. And there once was a time when, because of that drivenness, I had 6 Grand Canyons across my forehead. I mean, deep, those lines that go across our foreheads. And somebody said to me, "Why the lines in your forehead?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, what's driving all of those lines? What's causing all of those lines?" And he then said, "If you're a Christian, why the fret lines?" And I listened to that and I said, "These things are going." And I realized that I had to get my heart right on this issue, and you can see the remains of them at this point in my life. But the bottom line is that if we look like we're we're living a fret-based life, how can we say that we sing praise? And our heart's disposition is to sing praise. Pray expectantly, heart confidence. If you say that all things, whatever you ask in prayer, believing you shall receive, is true, would you ever ask the question, why pray? In the back of your mind or even verbally. I was talking to a young man this afternoon who was one of my students when we were out in Arizona. A young man that came, he's had a rough life and on money levels. And when I talked to Kyle this morning, he asked me. He said, "Hey, can you pray for me today?" I said, "Sure." What he is he works for a major equipment mover, and he's the back end of a convoy, if you will, that they're moving a 140-foot trailer that's over wide, over height, overweight, and articulates at 4 points. And he said, "We're moving this across Texas." And he said, "I shouldn't be here, but I was told to be here." And he got 4.5 hours sleep last night, and he said, "I need to make sure that I stay awake all day." I said, "Kyle, I'll pray." And so I just started praying throughout the day. He called me about 5:30. He said, "I've been wide awake all day." I said, "Kyle, I've been praying." Seriously. I was praying that he would stay awake all day. This is the reality of what should be happening in our lives. If we don't pray and people say, "Did you pray?" And you go, "Well, yeah. Did anything change?" "Well, no." "Well, okay, so there ought to be regular reality to this on a regular basis. I know that's a lot of redundance, but that's okay. Go obediently, visible actions, okay? How many of you have, who are parents, grandparents, leaders of any kind, have ever used the phrase, actions speak louder than words? Is that true? Always, all right? And so as we take a look at this as believers, go everywhere, tell the gospel to all right? If our actions don't validate what our mouths yammer about, we got a problem, all right? And so this is where we're at this point. Now, I want to talk about this idea with all your mind. Now, You've probably heard, if you've been around the youth group at all, Pastor Andrew has been using Galatians 2:20 and this all-in concept for the last year or so. Are we all in? Are we all in? Are we all in? Are we all in? Well, that goes back to C.S. Lewis and even earlier in terms of church history. That's a term that's been around for a long, long time. Well, I love the English language because it's a descriptive language, and it enables you to just visualize things amazingly. But I also dislike the English language because there are some words that are absolutely concrete and leave you totally pinned in. The word in this context is the word all. If all is all, then what is not all? Nothing, all right? So with all your mind. I mean, I don't get to have my freedom to think about, no, all your mind, all right? You're all in. Mark 12:30. It's, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. Now, the interesting piece here is this. If you go back to Deuteronomy 6:5, which is where this comes from, it's interesting in that context, it does not include the word mind. Heart, soul, and strength is what's there. Well, why not? All right? Right? Understand that when Jesus, okay, and here's the thing. We look at the scriptures and we realize that, we need to be careful about saying who added that or who subtracted that in different passages. Well, by the time we get to the point in human history when Christ was walking on the planet, and he was walking in a predominantly Greek world, and the reason why, just from understanding culture and philosophy and life and living, that he added the word mind is because we were in a time, and when we were still in that time where the mind was becoming more significant in terms of understanding life and living and so forth and so on. Our thought and understanding. And it sort of is an additive to the Hebrew and the Semitic understanding of things. Whereas in the Greek world, it's the mind is where everything originates and is driven from, etc. And so remember that Jesus added this to this statement in Deuteronomy 6:5. And we need to realize that when we say all our mind, that means that there's not a fleeting thought that should not be a part of this, right? And that becomes important. And as we take a look at this aspect of this idea, let me move my pages here. We need to understand that all right? If we're committed to being Christians, that means we're all in all the time, and it ought to be visible in our lives, all right? All the time. And you go, that's not possible. Yes, it is. Why? Because we have the Word and we have the Holy Spirit living within us who enables us to pull this off every day, unless we have quenched the Spirit, unless we've grieved the Spirit, and we're not, functioning as we ought to in an obedient manner. So when we look back on this, the idea that, and this is C.S. Lewis speaking, Christians fail to process truth claims rationally. Now, when we take a look at that in the day and age that we find ourselves today, paper. Christians fail to process truth claims rationally instead of assessing the evidence and drawing the most reasonable inference. They typically rely on personal experience, emotional response, and blind faith only. Now, I added the word only, and I would argue that this is exactly the way many people in this country are functioning today. Because if we were actually processing truth, which means that you're dealing with that which is factual, you're dealing with that which is scientifically verifiable, etc., you're dealing with hardcore evidence, we would be functioning very differently. And you would be drawing reasonable inferences versus unreasonable inferences that are based on emotions and are not fact-based whatsoever. And unfortunately, we find ourselves in a situation where I read an article here the other day. It says, "Oh, gullible Americans. We're not operating factually." And this is part of the problem that we're dealing with, okay? And therein lies what we got to struggle with. And as we take a look at this, we talk with all our mind. Well, if you go to Acts 17:11, it's talking about the Bereans. How many of you know, in the day and age of Luke and Paul and the apostles, who the Bereans were? Anybody know who the Bereans were? Right? Okay, so that's the activity that they engaged in. But who were the Bereans? Now, if I were to put it in modern day American vernacular, it would be this. The Bereans were the Appalachia Hill folk of the United States. They were the most illiterate, untaught, the folks from over across the hill on the other side of wherever. They were not the university folk. They were not the folks that were well educated. But yet, nevertheless, we find that they were people who had readiness of mind. And that's an important principle to grasp a hold of. Do we have ready minds to search the Scriptures daily? Well, if they were searching the Scriptures daily, I'm sure that they were searching other things daily as well. How much effort do we put into searching the Scriptures daily? How much effort do we put into being ready of mind? Our minds are keenly operating. In Romans chapter 12 and verse 2, it says, we have a renewed mind, the renewing of your mind. It's one of the most phenomenal passages in the entire New Testament, Romans 12, 1 and 2. And so this is what it means to be with all your mind engaging this. And then in Philippians 2:5, this is another one of those verses that I read and I go, it almost makes you just, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. What on earth are you talking about? You want me to have the same mind that Jesus? And the answer is, Paul says, yes. I want that to be the mind that you have. It is possible. We aren't given impossibilities in the Scripture, and this is the marvel of it. Okay, so that's how it is necessary for us if we're going to have this whole idea that we're within the realm of having our mind in it completely. All right. Now, we're in a situation, and I want to look at just a couple of these verses from John. Actually, I'm just going to go straight to John 21:25. Because as we take a look at the New Testament, we take a look at what we have, all right, and then we take a look at what we don't have, right? Now, John 21:25 reads this way. It's the last verse in John's Gospel. He said, there are also many other things which Jesus did, the which, if they should be written, every one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that should be written. When we ask the question, how verifiable is the life of Christ and the activities of Christ and who he is and so forth and so on, we have a Christ that is verifiable at such an extensive level inside and outside of the Scriptures that it's next to impossible to defeat the reality of who Christ was and what he did. In comparison to every other religious person, every other intellectual person, religious person, philosophical person, I mean, you name it. When we take a look at this, we just take a look at the four Gospels alone, without going through the whole Old Testament and all the prophecies and everything that goes along with it, anybody that says that Jesus did not exist, did not achieve any of this, did not accomplish any of this, is operating in, I'm not sure what kind of space, all right? They're denying that which is undeniable. And so then when we look at Christ and we ask the question, how did he do this, all right? Well, Christ walked everywhere. He was always doing something. He was always in the midst of a large number of people, both before the resurrection and after the resurrection, up to the point of the ascension. He publicly displayed himself in multiple events in front of multiple witnesses, basically his entire life. So when we ask the question, when somebody asks us the question, tell me about your faith and tell me about who you have your faith in. Well, my faith is in Jesus Christ. Well, who's he? You're left with a great opportunity. Why? Because you go to the New Testament. This is who Jesus is. I'm the light. I'm the word. Just go on and on and on and on. So as we take a look at this and we try to answer the question, how do I display my faith? How do I argue my faith? I just go to the Scriptures and say, in and out of the Scriptures, okay, the extra biblical material as well as the biblical material gives us a situation where, frankly speaking, it's easy. And it doesn't crisscross itself. It doesn't, it's not like a human being who can't keep track of who he lied to or who he told the truth to or who he whatever. But we have this physical public display that affects how we do this. Now, all right, so this is where we're at. It's all our mind. Now, what we then have is this, okay? We have to ask the question, where do we go with this, all right? And where do we go with this duty aspect of things? Well, Pastor and I were talking last Wednesday, and he talked about the training and the teaching and so forth. Well, you should have expected that there was going to be something military in this because it's Veterans Day, and I spent 40 years in this Navy and Marine Corps and Army, and I literally have had an ID card from all four branches of the service. I mean, that's bizarre. But when we talk about how do we do what we do, what's the model that we're going to use? For us in the military, it's to teach, train, deploy, and fight. You begin with some knowledge. Knowledge alone is fine, but it's not fine. What do you do with it, all right? Train. This is where muscle memory and or knowledge is applied, all right? Then to deploy and fight, put it to work against the enemy. It's in your life and purpose is what's going on here. And so, as we think about this, okay, I'm going to illustrate this for you. Say, I spent a good bit of my history with the Marine Corps, all right? Training with them, etc., deploying with them, fighting with them. Well, not fighting with them even, but even though I wasn't in the Navy and I wasn't in the Marine Corps, but I was wearing their uniform, which is the fun part about being a chaplain. So just to illustrate for this, okay, so to look at this last statement at the bottom of the slide, reality is this. We fight the way we trained, all right? If you want to make a mistake, train wrong. If you want to make a mistake, train for the wrong event. So over the course of about 6 months, this is the world that I lived in, okay, back in this, and this is when I was in the reserves at that time. So, there was I can't remember what year it is. The year is not the issue here. So in August, after a long training period, we deployed to 29 Palms, all right, which is in the desert of Southern California, all right? It's a rather warm place. And we trained to go into a live fire exercise, and that means real bullets, real artillery, real missiles, real jets, and this is how we basically were graded on how well we survived, and did we survive this training exercise, which meant that the whole battalion had to be running at crack precision for a desert exercise, all right? In March of the following year, we loaded up on an airplane, took off from Detroit, which is where this was a Michigan battalion, landed in Trondheim, Norway. And for the next 17 days, the temperature did not get above 20 degrees below zero. Now, if we took the training that we went through to do the exercise in 29 Palms and tried to apply that to a cold weather exercise, would we have survived? Not at all. So the way you train, the way you fight, the way you do life, the way you do ministry, as we're going to look at in a minute, is entirely dependent on the way you trained. We had to train completely. Now, it was easy because, the guys from Michigan are great because these are cold weather guys to begin with. The hard part for them was going to 29 Palms. Going to Norway at that time of the year, they said, bring it on. I mean, these guys snowshoed, skied. I mean, they ice fished. I mean, built snow houses. I mean, so it was easy. But they knew going to 29 Palms that they had to get themselves ready for a desert exercise because it impacted how we ate, it impacted how we handled our rifles, etc. I mean, everything. So as we think through this, we couldn't have trained the same way because if we did, we would have frozen to death in Norway. Which means and this is the neat part about this, and the fun part about this was that I was in a reserve battalion, and we were running alongside 3 active duty battalions. One from Lejeune, one from Pendleton, and I can't remember where the third one was from. But because these guys had been training their whole lives in Michigan in cold weather, we basically outran and outfought the active duty battalions, and we were told to stand down so that the active duty battalions could catch up. So the reserves outdid the active duty, which is unusual. Believe me, that's unusual when something like that happens. But this is how substantial this outfit was that I was working with. And it was amazing for me to watch this, okay? So now, as we think about the biblical model, so we need to teach, there needs to be knowledge. And Pastor said, we teach well. We've taught and we've taught and we've taught and we've taught and we've taught. So we have a bunch of big-headed people who know everything under the sun, but have not been trained. They have no muscle memory in terms of what to do with it, to do ministry, actions in the world. And so the dilemma that we have in the 21st century is this. We do ministry the way we trained. Well, we trained in an academic environment. And you ask the question, why do so many people in the church have so much difficulty interacting with the people outside of the church? Because we can't talk to them. We haven't trained ourselves to go into the whole, every nook and cranny of the world to meet people to actually do the work of the ministry. We view the ministry as that which occurs within the 4 corners of this building, among ourselves. So 70 years ago, C.S. Lewis recognized Christians are largely unprepared to make the case for what they believe. It's easy for me and for Robert to talk about who Jesus is and make the case for our faith, right? It's a lot more difficult to try to make that case for somebody who doesn't attend here, maybe has never darkened the doors of a church, etc. And so This is what he said 70 years ago. And then he said, many in the church still deny the need to be prepared in the first place. When you talk to people in the church, and pastors, I'm not talking as Wayne speaking. Pastor and I talked about this, and he said, yes, we teach well, but we train poorly. And therefore, we can't go out into the community. We're not going into the community and having an impact. And there are people, and I'm not suggesting anybody here by any stretch of the imagination who argue that we don't even need to be prepared to do that, right? Well, the question that we have to ask is, what has changed since 70 years ago? So, Dietrich Bonhoeffer made this: action springs not from thought, but from the readiness for responsibility. As we take a look at this, readiness of mind equals readiness of responsibility, readiness for responsibility. Are we ready for responsibility? Are we ready to do the work of the ministry as the New Testament lays it out, not as the modern church has created the idea of that which constitutes ministry? The soldier is summoned to a life of active duty, and so is the Christian. Well, Brian and I, and those of you that have been in reserves, know the difference between the active duty guys and reserve guys, right? The weekend warriors, all right? But I will tell you that, and that's why I use that illustration of the Marine battalion that I was with. When we got ready to go up against the active duty guys, we got serious. And we said, we're not going to be accused of being the weekend warriors. We're going to whoop them active duty guys. And we basically put it on. And this is what we need to be doing. It's a life of active duty, all right? As we think about our function, our responsibilities, the behaviors, being a Christian, being committed, being all in means that we are engaging in a life of active duty. And that's what an active duty Christian, all right? That's not, somebody who's semi-comatose. That's not somebody who is well practiced at exercising their sitting capacity, all right? No, it's people who are out in the midst of things, all right? So now, here's the question that Wallace asks. Is your Christian worldview reflected in everything that you do? Again, the all-in idea. Is your Christian worldview reflected in everything that you do? Yes or no? And again, he could have just said, is it reflected in all you do? Which is basically the same thing. So as we wrestle with this, if we ask ourselves the tough question, am I really all in as a Christian? Yes or no? So what he suggests is make a list of your activities this week, all right? What did I do? Have you ever done that before? Where you did a 24/7, week-long, month-long analysis of what you have done? What you were occupying yourself with? In my former life, I was one of these individuals, and so I started out in college as an industrial engineer, all right? Time studies, all of that sort of stuff, down to the minute. What do you do? Whether it's on the production floor or it's in your life or whatever. That's a very uncomfortable process to go through. Because if you do that and you go through your whole week and you look at every day what you've done, this is at the minute level. This is not at the every couple of hours level or something. If you make a list of your activities this week, okay, what needs to change in order for you to embrace your duty as a Christian case maker? Now, pastor's going to get to this. Can you make the case for Christianity and reflect your passion as a Christian, right? Ouch. This is getting down into the nitty-gritty of our lives, and this is where, pastor really wants us to think about this, to think through carefully. Am I really committed to being a Christian, living it, it being that which is it just oozes from us on our faces, in our disposition, in our worldview, what I do and don't do, why I do or why I don't do, etc. And so as we think about this, okay, and so you wrestle with this, and okay, I want to go back to this for a second. Guess who in the military are the trainers? Are your E1s your trainers? Not on your life. Are your O1s and O2s your trainers? No way. You don't even let them into that position, all right? The trainers are the people who've been learned, they've been taught, they've been trained, and they've actually, in this context, they deployed and fought, and they lived it, right? And then they go back and train, right? They cycle back to train. So, as we take a look at this, how many of us ought to be the principal trainers here? I would argue that those of us that we ought to be the trainers. Anybody that's been a Christian more than 4 or 5 years is ready to start training others to do the work of the ministry. And that's the job that we're not getting done. And you know, I don't know where pastor's going to go with this. I'm just giving you the heads up, okay? The freight train's coming, all right? Because he wants us to get to the point where we're figuring out how do we do this training so that we don't have young people walking out of the church when they graduate from high school and never turning back and never coming back, all right? And so as you think about this, okay, so I would challenge you to go through this on your own and actually sort it out. Could I be a trainer of the next generation of believers, young people, new believers, okay? You have somebody that comes to know the Lord in their 40s or 50s, right? It does happen. Ask yourself this question. Is that person going to naturally gravitate towards somebody who's 18 and say, teach me how to be a Christian? I don't think so. They're going to look for somebody who is their age and has been around and can actually train them, help them through the education process, teaching, can train them so that they can actually go through this deploy and fight aspect of things. Because that's what we do. I mean, by the time we get into our mid-30s and 40s, you know, work's on, right? Future is on. And it's life and purpose, okay? This is just, you know, where we are. And so as we look at this, as we go forward, all I can do is challenge you to do this. Ask yourself the tough questions. Figure out where you're at. Get ahead of pastor. When he comes back, surprise him, all right? And say, I'm ready to train. I want to be a trainer. Train the trainer, all right? Etc. So this has got me charged. This has me, you know, wired, if you haven't figured that one out. I mean, I love this idea because this is the life that I lived for a long, long time. But not in the church. Why not in the church? Why not in the church, right? Who are you training? Kids? Grandkids? And I had a training opportunity this afternoon, all right, with Tucker, all right? I just saw him walk down there. We sat around a hole that we were digging, walking through all sorts of different things, life things, and training him to understand how life works from God's perspective. How does a branch work? How do you make the analogy between the way our bodies work in terms of the blood system and the way that the liquids and everything else, foods go up and down in a bush, all right? Taking the opportunities to get alongside of kids and grandkids in that kind of a way. I mean, I yearn for things like that. I mean, I just with my own kids and grandkids. So this is what we have to do. We have to look for the opportunities to be able to actually do this. If we're going to reach into the lives of other people, so that they then, those that are younger than us, and I guess I'm about the oldest living human being in the room, what's the world going to look like? I hear people say, what's this world going to look like for my kids and grandkids? Well, my question becomes this: what are you doing about it? What are you doing to set them up for success, right? So this is where we need to go. So anyway, I'm 6 over. I better stop. All right? So let's pray. Father, thanks for tonight. Thank you for the day. Thank you for Pastor. And I just pray for him as he has just got so much on his mind right now, not the least of which is Mel getting better. Give him safety as he goes down and comes back. And Lord, I know that this is going to be a tough week at the Wilds, and he's got a ministry opportunity here, given the fact that one of the children of one of the staff members here just recently committed suicide within the last few days. And I know that the ministry opportunities for him are going to be pretty significant. And as he comes back to us, right, and he has a burden and a yearning desire to see us to be able to step up to the training of the next generation, and not just teaching them, but training them to do the work of the ministry. And Father, may that be what we're all about, and may our lives demonstrate the fact that that's what we're all about. And we give you thanks for this in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you. You're dismissed. Goodbye. Have fun. Whatever you're going to do. Yeah.